Okay, let's dive right in. We're going to unpack one of the most important stories of the 20th century, the long, incredibly complex, and world-changing struggle for India's independence from the British Empire. And you have to understand, this wasn't just one single event. Oh no, this was a century-long evolution of ideas, of protests, and of immense sacrifice. This one sentence, it just says it all, doesn't it? From nationalist leader Bal Gangadhar Tilak, it perfectly captures the fire at the heart of this whole movement. Swaraj, which means self-rule, wasn't just some abstract political goal. For millions of people, it became this deeply personal, non-negotiable demand, a cry that would literally reshape a subcontinent. So, where did this all kick off? Well, you might think it started with politicians or organized protests, but it didn't. The first massive, coordinated challenge to British power was something else entirely. It was a violent, sprawling uprising that caught the British completely by surprise. It's wild how history can turn on the smallest things. The spark, the final straw, came down to rifle cartridges. Indian soldiers, or sepoys, working for the British East India Company, were given new cartridges. The rumor was they were greased with cow and pig fat. Now, for Hindu and Muslim soldiers, who had to bite these cartridges open, this was a profound religious insult. And that spark lit a fire of resentment that had been building for decades. The rebellion exploded, spreading from the military barracks into a full-on civil revolt. But in the end, it was brutally crushed. The failure, though, led to a massive turning point. The East India Company, this private corporation that had been running the show for 100 years, was dissolved. And in its place, the British Crown took direct, formal control. The era of the British Raj had begun. So even though the rebellion failed, it fundamentally changed the game. All right, so armed revolt didn't work. What's plan B? Well, the fight for freedom had to shift. It moved from the battlefield into the debating hall, as a new, educated class of Indians started looking for a different way forward. And so, in 1885, the Indian National Congress was born. But here's the fascinating part. Initially, they weren't demanding independence at all. Not even close. Its first members were Western-educated elites who were actually loyal to the empire. They were basically a debating society, passing polite resolutions, asking for things like better job opportunities and the right to take civil service exams in India. They were asking for reforms, not a revolution. But you can probably guess what happened next. This whole moderate, please and thank you approach was slow. For a lot of people, it was deeply unsatisfying. Patience started wearing thin, and that led to a major split in the movement, giving rise to much more radical voices. The real flashpoint was the partition of Bengal in 1905. The British claimed it was just for administrative efficiency, to make things easier to govern. But Indians saw right through it. They saw it as a classic divide-and-rule strategy, pitting Hindus against Muslims to crush the growing spirit of nationalism. This sparked absolute outrage, leading to huge protests and boycotts of British goods in what was called the Swadeshi movement. And all this frustration boiled over in 1907, when the Indian National Congress officially split in two. On one side, you had the moderates, still hoping for gradual reform from within the system. But on the other, you had the radicals, led by guys like Tilak, who were now openly demanding Swaraj. That's right, complete self-rule. For them, the time for polite petitions was over. So, just as the movement seemed caught between writing letters and throwing bombs, a new leader arrived on the scene. He came from South Africa with a completely radical new idea, one that would mobilize millions and totally redefine the fight for freedom. That leader, of course, was Mahatma Gandhi, and his philosophy was satyagraha. It literally means truth force, but don't mistake it for passive resistance. This was an active but nonviolent refusal to cooperate with an unjust system. The whole idea was to challenge immoral laws through civil disobedience, using soul force to change the hearts and minds of your opponents. It was a moral weapon, and it turned out to be unbelievably powerful. So how did this actually work? Well, during the non-cooperation movement, Gandhi called on Indians to just systematically withdraw from every single pillar of British rule. Boycott their goods, their courts, their schools, quit your government job, refuse to pay their taxes. The goal was simple but incredibly bold: to make India impossible to govern by peacefully grinding the entire administration to a halt. And this quote from Gandhi really gets to the core of it. He wasn't arguing for chaos or lawlessness. He was saying that when a law is fundamentally unjust, it's actually your moral duty as a citizen to break it, but to do it peacefully, civilly, and to be willing to accept the punishment. This was the moral high ground, and it gave the movement its incredible strength. So the Gandhian movements brought the cause of independence to the masses, to everyday people. The Second World War would be the final catalyst, but it also exposed and really deepened the growing cracks within India itself. When Britain dragged India into World War II without asking anyone, those cracks became gaping holes. The Congress leadership was furious and resigned from the government in protest. They demanded immediate independence. But the Muslim League took a totally different route. They supported the British war effort, hoping to gain some influence. And then, in 1940, they made their goal crystal clear. They wanted a separate, independent nation for Muslims, the nation that would become Pakistan. Faced with the British refusing to leave and the world at war, Gandhi launched his final and his most forceful mass movement. In 1942, he issued a powerful call to action: do or die. This launched the Quit India movement. The message couldn't have been clearer. The British needed to leave India immediately, for good. The British response was swift and harsh. They arrested over 100,000 people and threw the entire Congress leadership in jail for years. They managed to suppress the movement, but the writing was on the wall. The British government finally realized that holding on to India after the war was going to be impossible. The question was no longer if they would leave, but how. And what happened next was the heartbreaking, bittersweet end to this long struggle. Freedom was finally there, right within grasp, but it was going to come at a terrible, terrible price: the division of the very nation that had fought so long to be united.
The end came with unbelievable speed. Britain, weakened by the war, just couldn't hold on to its empire anymore. The plan to partition the subcontinent was announced in June 1947. Just 2 months later, it was over. The British Raj was finished, and two new nations, Pakistan and India, were born.
But the celebration of freedom was drowned out by unimaginable violence. The new borders, drawn in a rush, cut right through towns, villages, and homes. It unleashed horrific clashes. Millions of people were forced to flee in one of the largest and most tragic migrations in all of human history. It was a brutal, bloody beginning for two new countries. And that leaves us with a heavy question, one that still echoes today. The Indian independence movement was an incredible story of triumph against colonial rule, but its final chapter was a tragedy of division. It really forces us to ask, what is the true cost of freedom? And how do you ever heal the scars left behind when a nation is born by being torn in two?